Pliny. A friend of mine put me onto these a couple days ago, and if you've not heard them before, do yourself a favor and go listen. Get the Sweet Nothings album. It's 4 songs. Just do yourself a favor and listen to that. It's fantastic. This is also fantastic. This is the Bifrost 2 from Schiit Audio. A huge thank you to Max from Sonic Visions for sending this out to me. It's almost impossible to get hold of in the UK, as with most Schiit products, but in the US it's about $700. I've got a few other DACs to compare it to. I've got the Modius, and that's because a lot of people are going to be having a Modius already and wanting to upgrade their DAC, preferably within the Schiit family, I'd imagine, and so that's going to be a good comparison there, because this is the next step up from the Modius. And then the Sonkos SGD1, which is a similarly, it's $500 priced Delta Sigma DAC. I also have this, the Modi multibit from Schiit, and I was going to compare it to the Bifrost 2 just because these are both multibit DACs, which we'll get into what that means later. The short answer is I'm not going to do that just because this is awful. This is the V1 though. There was a silent revision to the Modi multibit which apparently makes it sound way better, so I'm not going to pass any judgment on that for now. We're just going to talk about the Bifrost 2 on its own. Do not recommend the Modi multibit version 1 anyway though. So, the Bifrost 2. This is... if punk rock was a DAC, this would be it. This is a warm, thick, kind of dark sounding DAC, but it's so much fun. This is a flavor DAC, but it's a delicious flavor. Let's talk a little bit about the build. The build is Schiit's standard chassis design. It will stack perfectly with an Asgard 3 or a Magnus, something like that. I do kind of wish that it was just a little bit wider, because then you could fit 2 of their smaller ones side by side on it, but because this goes slightly over halfway, you can't do that. So you're kind of left having to stack them like that. That I kind of wish was different, but not exactly a big issue. The actual finish is lovely. I really prefer this kind of matte finish to Schiit's older brushed metal one. It looks a lot sleeker. The chassis and build is really, really nice. Let's have a look at the back. Connectivity is pretty standard, with the exception that everything's upside down. I don't know why that is. Upside down XLR ports, technically upside down RCA ports, SD card for firmware updates, that's nice. Coax, optical, upside down USB, internal power supply, and power switch. I wish the power switch was on the front. If it was on the front, that would be great. However, this is an R2R DAC, and it's also one of Schiit's multibit DACs. R2R DACs do need to be thermally stable in order to be at their best. That's the case with a lot of DACs. The May, for example, even when you mute it, it keeps things hot to keep it at the proper temperature. The Yggdrasil from Schiit is infamous for how long it takes to warm up. There was a noticeable warm up with this. The day after I turned it on, it was definitely different than when I'd first plugged it in. Wouldn't recommend turning this off and on. It's modular, so you can unscrew all these, and if there is updates to either the USB module, the DAC itself, the output stage, whatever, you can just swap a new module in. How good that is, I don't really know, because technically you could just sell this and buy the new version for, I don't know, a $200 loss. A new module's probably going to cost you $200 anyway, so I don't know how much benefit that will really be, but it's certainly nice to have the option. There's a couple other things I want to talk about under the hood, so let's have a look. This is it all opened up, and the first thing you'll notice is it's got a big fat transformer. That means it's got a linear power supply, and a linear power supply is more expensive and less efficient than a cheaper switch mode power supply, but it's important in audio because it means it will produce less ripple and less noise than a switch mode power supply would. It's nice to see that. Schiit actually includes linear power supplies on all of their products. Even the Modi, it just has the transformer in the wall wart. That's why Schiit's wall warts are so heavy. This is what I really wanted to talk about. This is Schiit's Unison USB module. Now, this is different from the Unison USB in the Modius. The Modius is using Unison USB just in the name of the driver, that's all. This actually has some extra hardware features. The biggest thing is galvanic isolation. Now, galvanic isolation means that this and your DAC is completely electrically separate from your PC. These two devices here are isolation transformers, and what that does is it means no noise can be passed through to the rest of the circuitry or the DAC. When noise is really bad, it can literally end up just coming through the outputs. You could have your GPU activity audible through your speakers or headphones because it's being passed through your chain. Even if it's not that bad though, it can affect other things. These two devices are voltage-controlled crystal oscillators, clocks. Those affect the jitter performance of your DAC, the time domain performance, and even small fluctuations in the voltage feeding those will cause them to behave differently. And so the fact that they are completely isolated from noise coming from your PC means you should get much more reliable, consistent, and overall better performance from your DAC. It's fantastic to see that. I really wish more DACs had galvanic isolation. It's one of the things I love about the May, and it's awesome to see it on a DAC this low cost. So, this is clearly a well thought out product with a lot of nice features that you don't really see on other DACs at this price point. How does it sound? Well, let's first talk about what multibit means. Multibit is just Schiit's marketing term for R2R. R2R DACs have a few differences to normal Delta Sigma DACs, and the main advantage is that they can just output any voltage you choose. A 16-bit resistor ladder, R2R, can just output 65,536 different voltages. A Delta Sigma DAC can output 2. It can be on or off. And so let's say your max output from your DAC is 1 volt, and off is 0. Let's say your music called for 0.8 volts at a certain point in time. A multibit or R2R DAC can just output 0.8 volts. Done. A Delta Sigma DAC can't do that. And so what it does is it will switch itself on and off really, really fast, several hundred times, and a low-pass filter averages out those on-off pulses. If it was switching on about 80% of the time, then it'll average out to about 0.8 volts. The advantage of that is that you can make a Delta Sigma DAC that performs better for a lot less money than you can make an R2R DAC, and historically R2R DACs haven't performed that well. It's only recently that we've started seeing really well performing stuff like the Hollow May, which is currently the best performing R2R DAC you can get. The Schiit multibit DACs don't measure all that well. That's true all the way from the Modi multibit through to the Yggdrasil. This gets about 85 dB of Synad, and the Modius gets about 115. So you might ask, well, why the hell would I buy this when that measures better? And the simple answer is this sounds better. There's a lot of people who will say an R2R DAC that measures worse will sound better than a Delta Sigma DAC that measures better. And I don't think that's a good blanket rule, because there are definitely exceptions. Aorist. But it does seem to be the case in quite a lot of situations. I don't know why that is, but R2R DACs just seem to have something about them that makes them sound better. Particularly in things like timbre. I don't know why that is. Even with an oversampling R2R DAC like this, timbre just seems to be more accurate. And I don't just mean warmer. There's a lot of people who will say something's got good timbre just because it's warm and smooth and or unresolving. That's not what I mean here. I mean this has actually more accurate and convincing timbre than the Modius does, not just it's smoothed over. So let's get on to how this sounds then. This is a very warm DAC. This is a very thick DAC. The reason it probably sounds warm is if you look at the measurements for it, it's got a lot of second-order harmonics. Second-order harmonics typically make things sound a bit warmer. Third-order harmonics typically make things sound a bit brighter. And that's actually part of the reason why tube amps sound warm. Even though the frequency response might be completely linear, it can still make things sound subjectively warmer. This is a very warm, very thick-sounding DAC, and I like it a lot. There's a lot of situations where you might want a bit more resolution. If you're listening to stuff like orchestral, an SGD1 is more resolving, it stages better, and it resolves air a little bit better than this does. But for a lot of kind of pop music, EDM, that sort of stuff, this is just a lot of fun. So let's pick a couple tracks. I'm using the arias at the moment. The track in the intro was Pan by Pliny, and actually let's use one of Pliny's songs. Pliny has a lot of kind of rock guitar type stuff. And if we go halfway through Impulse Voices. The middle DAC here is the Bifrost. The one on the left is the SGD1, and on the right is the Modius. On the Bifrost 2, this is really kind of impactful, thunderous, fast. You almost an in-your-chest type feel. The low end it's not snappy, but it's very, very forceful. If we switch to the Modius, you don't quite get that same weight behind it. You don't get any more detail or texture. It's just not quite as good. This is a better low-end presentation than the Modius. The SGD1 is a bit different. The SGD1, it's a lot faster. It's a lot more controlled and textured. You can get better timbre on the low end sometimes, but it's not as engaging for something like this. This is a lot more weighty, it's a lot more meaty, and for something like this, it's just making you want to headbang, whereas that one, it's good music and I like it a lot, but it's not as engaging. Where I would rather have something like the SGD1 though is this. This is Never by Phonad, and it's a lot snappier, faster type low end. Rather than being a thumping, thunderous bass guitar or kick drum, this is a lot faster, it's a snappier type of synth. And that's where the SGD1 and its resolution and speed really does take a little bit of an edge over the Bifrost. The difference isn't huge, and it's not like either of them is bad at all. They're both excellent in this situation. It's just the SGD1 and its presentation, it's just a touch better. It's a touch snappier, touch faster, it's a touch more resolving, and on this particular track I would take that over the Bifrost. With Pliny, it's not really even a competition. This is just so much more fun to listen to. Mids. Okay, so R2R DACs, one of the other things that they're known for is timbre. The May, that is the DAC that gives me the biggest sense of presence, of actually being there, of the music or whatever is being played being actually in front of me. I love that DAC for that. And other R2R DACs tend to do timbre really, really well. This is okay. It's nothing exceptional, but it's good. And compared to the SGD1 can often come across a little bit more resolving in the mids, but this can sound a little bit more lifelike. So let's do Night Remains by the rival bid. The vocals are just a touch more detailed on the SGD1, but on the Bifrost 2, your immediate instinct is that it's there. Whereas on that, it's a reproduction. This sounds a lot more lifelike. How much of that is actually due to obscuring of details? I don't know. Sometimes a little bit more detail can actually end up making something sound worse. That could be the case, I don't know, but whatever the reason for it is, this sounds just a little bit more lifelike, a little bit more convincing, and a little bit more real than that does, even though that's definitely more resolving. The Modius, though, both of those outclass it in just about every way. Both of them sound more real. The Modius almost sounds a little bit veiled in comparison to, well, definitely the SGD1 and slightly the Bifrost 2 as well. On this track especially, the stage is just a little bit smaller with the Modius. The Modius is a good DAC. I like it for the price. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's just when you're comparing it directly to something like this and the SGD1, it does fall behind. If you're wanting to know if this is worth the money to upgrade from a Modius, yes, absolutely. And the signature of this retains a lot of the characteristics of the Modius, which is getting its own review, by the way. It's a warm, slightly shithouse sound type DAC. It's very thick, but it's not overly thick that it won't work with a lot of music. It will work with anything you play, but there's some things, actually like this, where it really just excels. So mid timbre is good, and overall resolution is good, but not exceptional. There are other DACs that beat it. What about treble? It rolls off air a little bit. Air and the very upper treble isn't anywhere near as present as either the SGD1 or the Modius. The Modius has a little bit more air presentation. And in fact, this is a good song for demonstrating that. The last part of this song the reverberations of the guitar are just more present on the Modius and the SGD1 than they are on the Bifrost 2. Not by a huge amount. It's not something that you'd really, you'd plug in and immediately go, oh, wow, it's dark. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying if you're A-Bing, you will notice that there is a slight lack of air compared to the other two. Again, not in any way that would be considered obstructive. It's just something I noticed. The treble presentation overall is really good, though. It's more resolving than the Modius, not as resolving as the SGD1. It is going to be outclassed by some other DACs in the price range. ADI2, D90, the Gustard one, I forget what the name is. The Ares 2 from Denafrips, that's another R2R DAC, that measures a lot better. I imagine it's going to be more resolving than this just because some people have said that it's not massively outclassed by stuff like the D90, but you aren't buying this for outright resolution. You're buying this for the overall presentation, and the overall presentation and flavor you get with this is lovely. This is a shit house sound, this is a warm DAC, and I've never found this to be fatiguing. This is a song that I've used a couple times in reviews before, because the vocals in this are just teetering on the edge of being sibilant, and if your chain is prone to sibilance, it will be sibilant. If your chain is soft, it will sound soft. And so getting a balance on this song acts as kind of a barometer for me.
Step up your game to make it to the top, so go. Got a little competition on.
It's not harsh at all. I don't feel any even hint of sibilance, but it also doesn't sound soft, which is fantastic. This rides a really nice line between being resolving and transparent and clear without being aggressive. Some cheaper ESS stacks, like this on an SU8 V2 from SMSL was just horrible. It was really, really sharp and just not fun to listen to at all. Some DACs, like the Modius, actually is just a touch too soft on this.
You're gonna find it hard to cope with living on your own.
On the Modius, it's just a touch softer. So actually, this is a little bit better in terms of transients and vocal consonants than the Modius is, in my opinion. Soundstage. Soundstage is good, but it's not amazing. Soundstage is kind of an interesting one, because that's something that R2R DACs are normally well known for. In fact, the May stage is nuts. It's better than the Dave and M scaler. And this is okay. It's not as good as the SGD1, I think partially just because of the lack of air, but it's better than the Modius. So soundstage on this DAC is just overall good. I like the flavor this DAC gives. It's a really, really fun DAC to listen to. It's really engaging. It's a DAC I could happily have as my only DAC, but it's not going to be suitable for certain types of music. If you only listen to classical or more delicate acoustic type stuff, it's not going to work for you. If you mostly listen to pop, rock, EDM, that kind of stuff, it's going to be great. Let's talk about the SPDIF and USB inputs. When we opened it up, I showed the USB input and how it was isolated. That's fantastic, because that means that whether you're running it off a nice streamer or something, or your PC, it should sound roughly the same. Some DACs without that, especially cheaper ones, if you're plugging them into a gaming PC directly, they're going to get issues. I mean, like the Moto M2, I've got my monitors currently running off that. If I'm playing a game on my PC, I can literally hear GPU activity coming out through the monitors because that's picking up noise over the USB connection. You're not going to get that here because it's isolated. The SPDIF and USB inputs sound different. This is the Schiit Eater, and the reason I'm using this is because this is a Schiit product, so that way it's a Schiit USB input here, Schiit USB input here. It should be as close as possible, and they do sound different. Let's stick with the same song.
Let's make this happen, girl. We're gonna show them all that something good can work and you can work for you. And you know that it will. Let's get this started.
The USB input sounds a little bit better. It's just a little bit more resolving. The SPDIF input almost sounds a little bit flat, and that's, by the way, not just with this. I did try it off something like the Chord M scaler, which is a fantastic DDC, and I had the same thing. That was where I was like, what's going on here? The SPDIF input is not as good as the USB. I don't know why that is, but it's worth noting. And it's not a massive difference. It's subtle, but if you have the opportunity to use the USB input, you should. The other thing is that the balanced outputs sound better than the single-ended. Apparently this is the case for a lot of Schiit DACs. It's definitely the case on the Modius. It's much more prominent there. I tried both, and it's a little bit tricky. I don't want to say too definitively because I can't volume match when I'm switching and then having to adjust the volume myself. But the single-ended outputs definitely did not sound as good as the balance to me. It was just a touch softer, touch more closed in. It just wasn't quite as good. So where does that leave us then? Well, the tricky thing is, because this sounds so different, this is a lot warmer, this is a lot thicker, this is a lot more forceful, and a good word for it is thunderous than other DACs in the price range like the D90, 88.2, etc. I can't really answer the question of, is this outright better? Because it's different. It's not going to be the same for every single person, and depending on what genres of music you mostly listen to, that's going to be the determining factor. If you mostly listen to classical, if you mostly listen to acoustic type music, you probably want something a little bit more resolving and focused on the micro detail like the D90. If you mostly listen to rock, pop, EDM, and you just want that engagement and fun, and you don't need tons of soundstage, you don't need tons of resolution, you want that warmth. and the ability to listen to anything without it ever sounding harsh, this might be a good choice. I really like this DAC. I think it's fantastic. It's got its own flavor that nothing else really replicates, but it's not going to work for everyone. That's not a bad thing. I like when products do that. I like the HD800, for example, explicitly for that reason. I wear it like 10% of the time, but there's certain tracks which come on and you just go, this is an HD800 track. And there's going to be certain tracks, if I had this, where I'd go, this is a Bifrost 2 track. And I'd switch from the Hollow May to this, because I just want that thunderous, almost a little bit over the top warmth that this provides. I think this is a fantastic product. It's well worth your money. Thank you very much for watching. A huge thank you to all my patrons, especially King Jong-un, Ross, Chris, Mammal, and Daniel, my Diamond and Legend tier patrons. You guys are amazing. You guys are the ones that are making all this happen. Thank you so much to everyone who's supporting me. It's incredibly motivating, and I've had absolute blast making the videos so far. Thank you so much. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, all the money that I get is going into buying more stuff to review, paying for shipping for things that viewers are sending in. And if you'd like to come chat with me and others on Discord, there's a link to that in the description as well. Until next time, have a nice day. Now, stop watching videos, go enjoy some music.